Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about brake cylinders, brake master cylinders, wheel cylinders. We're going to go into clutch master and clutch slave cylinders. So now in the early days, when we first started with cars, our braking system was very simple. It was a single piston master cylinder that was directly connected to the pedal via a push rod, and that was then connected to the wheel cylinders front and rear. In the old days, most of your vehicles had drum brakes front and rear, as opposed to today's vehicles where the braking systems have developed and evolved, and now you have disc brakes in the front, drum brakes at the rear, and on your more high-end vehicles you will have discs front and rear. There are many reasons for this. Drum brakes, under excessive braking, get hot. When brakes get hot, they fade. Even though the drum brakes stop the vehicle, they're not the most efficient. So as time progressed and went on, they developed the brake booster and the brake disc. Once you go from drums to discs, you need the booster to give you the added pressure to apply enough force on the front calipers to actually slow those discs down. So that's what the booster is there for. The other thing is they went from a single master cylinder to a dual piston master cylinder. And the reason for this is they found that on the single piston system, if you had a leak or one of your wheel cylinders started leaking, you had no brakes and you couldn't stop your vehicle. With the new, more modern tandem piston, and you can see how the seals fit into the piston. The pistons are grooved and the seal fits firmly in the piston. You have two circuits. So one piston would activate your rear brakes and the other piston would activate your front brakes. That way, if any of the two systems fail, you've still got enough braking to stop your vehicle. So that's why they went over to that. So let me run through the cylinders and what goes in them. So in the old days, most of the cylinders were made out of cast iron like this. Single piston with a seal on it. And when this piston gets pushed into the cylinder and moves down the cylinder, it forces the hydraulic fluid, brake or clutch fluid, out of the cylinder into the pipes and then onto your wheel cylinders. And then on these early systems, you had that little washer which acts as a valve. You can see the holes in there. And that's to allow your piston to be able to come back and the fluid to move from the one side of the piston to the other side of the piston. And then you had your cup with your spring, which then pushes everything back to where it should be when you take your foot off the pedal. But as I said, that wasn't a very efficient system. So then we went on to more modern cylinders, and from cast iron we went on to aluminium. They weigh just as well, if not better. They're lighter, so there's a lot of advantages to it. Now this is a tandem cylinder. You'll see that your reservoir bottle has two ports, one to the rear, one to the front. That way supplying brake fluid to either side of the piston. Then you have your piston maker. That's your first piston, which has two seals in it to create the hydraulic pressure, and your second piston also with two seals in it, also to create your hydraulic pressure. So one of these would be your front brakes and the other one would be your rear brakes. As you can see, this is a twin port. So one of these ports will go to the rear brakes, one to the front. You also get a 4-port where two lines will go to the rear and two to the front. This one, the brake pipe will split at the back of the vehicle. Whereas the other system, you have a brake pipe for left and brake pipe for right, front and rear. So from there, you've now got brake fluid in the system and you press the brake pedal, there's no air in the system. The brake fluid gets forced out of the cylinder through these two ports into your brake lines, and it moves on to your wheel cylinders at the rear and your calipers in the front. Calipers are for disc brakes and wheel cylinders are for drum brakes. So your fluid will come in over here. The pistons are grooved and the seals fit into the groove. So as your piston moves, your seal moves with it. Well, your seal helps the piston to move forward. And you have two of these pistons, one on either side of the cylinder. The fluid comes in the middle of this, and as you apply pressure, the brake fluid is not as compressible as air. That's what hydraulic pressure is. And it's a lot easier and a lot more stable than air would be. That's why we use brake fluid. So your brake fluid will come into the cylinder. It will push against the seal on this piston and the seal on that piston, which will then force your pistons out, pushing on your brake shoes, applying pressure on your brake drums, slowing your vehicle. In the front on the caliper on most vehicles, yes, you have two brake pads on a caliper, but one is moved by the piston and the other one is pulled against the brake disc by the caliper. Your calipers slide on the pins. So on average sedan and buckies and that, you would have a single piston caliper, and on your more high performance vehicles you'll have either a dual piston or quad piston, in which case you'll have two pistons on the one side of the caliper and two on the other, and they will then force the brake pads against the disc, slowing your vehicle down and bringing your vehicle to a stop. So now, in the old days, when you replaced a brake master cylinder or wheel cylinder or caliper, you'd put your new cylinder in, you'd fill your reservoir with brake fluid, and you'd get someone to sit in the car and they would pump the pedal to compress the air in the system and work it down to your bleeding bolt. Pump several times and then hold the pedal down, putting pressure on the fluid. You would open this bleeding bolt and fluid and air would come out. You would repeat this till the brakes were nice and firm and not spongy. The spongy brakes is an indication of the air in the system. But as time has progressed, we've moved on, and nowadays you have brake systems that have to be reverse bled. So instead of filling the reservoir with fluid and pumping the pedal several times till the fluid moves down to the cylinders and out as you open and close the bleeding screw, we bleed from the bottom. So what you would do is, once everything is connected, you would take a syringe, a big syringe, or you can get a self-bleeding, reverse bleeding system. You'd attach it to the bleed screw, you'd open the screw, and you would force the fluid through from this end. So air is lighter, so air will travel up first before the fluid. That way making it easier to bleed your brake system. This way of bleeding can be used on the older systems, and obviously on certain of the new systems it has to be used. So that way you get all the air out of the system and your brakes work, and you can drive and keep yourself safe. The other important thing to note is it's always advisable to use a premium brake fluid. And the reason for this is your brake fluid is designed to not destroy your rubbers. Whereas on your cheaper fluids that are not manufactured to spec, your rubber seal life will not be what it should, and eventually you'll be replacing cylinders again or seals. Now we can move on to the clutch system. So you have a clutch master cylinder and a clutch slave cylinder. So what the hydraulic cylinders do in the clutch circuit is, in the old days you had a clutch cable which attached to your clutch pedal, went all the way down to your clutch fork, and when you press the clutch pedal, the cable will pull the fork and force the thrust bearing onto the pressure plate, putting pressure on the pressure plate, opening it up and disengaging your clutch from the engine. But some of the vehicles, you ended up having a left leg the size of a tree stump and your right leg's taken away at once. So what they did to make it easier and more comfortable for people is they brought hydraulics into the system, which was a lot stronger and a lot more power and a lot less effort on your end. On the earlier vehicles, your clutch master cylinder looked very similar to your brake master. The only difference is you'd have one piston instead of a tandem, and you would have one exit port, one pipe going down to your clutch slave cylinder. But as time has progressed, things have gotten smaller and they have to be space saving, and they've come up with new products that wear better. So from cast iron, it went to aluminium, and now it's come to plastic master cylinders and plastic slaves. And this is where reverse bleeding is critical, because plastic cylinders, due to the makeup of the cylinder and the design of the cylinder, cannot be bled by pumping the pedal and then letting the air out and pumping the pedal again and holding it. They have to be reverse bled. We've got our new plastic cylinders. Here's your master cylinder, and already you can see the difference. If you take a look at the brake master, you can see that the seals are fitted into the piston. They can't move unless they move with the piston. Whereas on the new cylinders, your seal just clips into the cylinder, and instead of your seal moving and pushing the brake fluid, your piston does it all. The seal stays behind. That piston just slides into that seal. The seal itself clips in very lightly into the cylinder, and that's why they have to be reverse bled, because with this system assembled, you fill it with brake fluid and you pump your pedal. When you let go, the seal clips out, And that's why the guys will say to you that these clutch master cylinders are faulty. It's because they're not bleeding them correctly, they're not reverse bleeding them. The other thing you'll notice with this clutch master is it's got no reservoir. Again, it's a space-saving thing from the auto manufacturers. This cylinder is fed from your brake master reservoir. So there'll be a pipe from this brake master reservoir that comes and attaches here, and that reservoir is then enough for your brake master and your clutch, or your braking system, clutch system. That's your clutch master. The same as your brake master. You have a push rod which pushes the piston and attaches to the clutch pedal or the brake pedal. You'll see these are adjustable. So that's to allow a small amount of play between the push rod and the piston, and that's where you'd lock it in place and your system works. On your brake master cylinders, this adjustment should never be tampered with. It's preset by the factory, and as soon as you turn it in or out, it will affect your brakes like this. So if you turn it out, it will put more pressure on your piston. And even though you're sitting there and your brakes feel fine and off you drive, and 3 or 4 or 5 k's later, your brakes get very hard and they bind and your car stops. The reason for that gap between the push rod and the piston is to allow for the expansion in the hydraulic fluid, because hydraulic fluid does get hot and it will expand. It just won't boil the way water does. That's why we don't use water in the system. The other thing with brake fluid is it acts as a lubricant as well. That's why you want to use a premium brand lubricant, because your piston is a moving part. So it needs to be lubricated when sliding in and out of the cylinder. So that's why that should never be adjusted. It should be left as is according to factory spec. You'll find that when you buy a lot of the clutch master cylinders, this is loose. Again, just check your vehicle manufacturer specifications as to what that tolerance should be, and then set it up and lock it. So again, you'll press your brake pedal, your clutch pedal. Your piston will force the fluid into the clutch line down to your clutch slave cylinder. So your clutch slave cylinder is a single piston cylinder. The fluid comes in the one side and it just pushes the piston forward against the push rod. Again, you will have a seal and a spring. So when you let go, the seal creates the pressure. When you put your foot down, when you let go, it can return to where it should be, thus allowing your piston to travel back and forth as you press it, but also as your clutch wears, your piston won't return to the same position each time. Same with your brake pads and brake shoes. As your brake pads and shoes wear, your wheel cylinder piston stays out further and further each time. And that is so that when you press the pedal, if this piston didn't move in the wheel cylinder, you would have to pump your pedal 2 or 3 times to get the piston to where it needs to be to activate your brake shoe. So that's why there's always pressure in a brake hydraulic system and a clutch hydraulic system. And so that the piston is on the slave cylinder or the wheel cylinder or the caliper, it's where it needs to be for that component to work optimally in order to activate your brakes or decompress your clutch or whatever the case may be. So there you have your one piston, dust cover to prevent dirt getting in, and then your push rod. Your push rod will then, as you apply force to the clutch pedal, will push your clutch fork. Your clutch fork in turn will push your thrust bearing onto your pressure plate, and in your pressure plate you have a diaphragm. So as you press it, the big disc in your pressure plate, which is a running face for your clutch, it moves that off the clutch, basically putting your gearbox into neutral. When I say neutral, it's once you've done this, it's not being driven by the motor anymore. It's in freewheel, allowing you to change your gears. So that's why what happens is, as these cylinders wear, guys will say to you, well, it's very difficult to change gears, especially when the car's cold. It's because the seals inside either the slave cylinder or the master cylinder have worn. So you're not losing brake fluid, and that is an indicator that either your clutch is worn or that the seals in your cylinders are worn. Another telltale sign is if your master cylinder is leaky, you check on the firewall of the vehicle where it bolts onto the firewall. You quite often will see a mark left by the brake fluid. As the brake fluid leaks out, it runs down the firewall. On some of the vehicles, it will actually run in under your carpet and not on the outside of the firewall. So what happens in that case is each time you leak it, you suck in air. So eventually your brakes are going to be very spongy and they're not going to be as high or effective as they were before the cylinder started leaking. And then the obvious one is if you have a leaking brake line. Generally the steel lines do not leak unless if you've changed the cylinder and you've put them in and you've cross-threaded them, then they will leak. The one that does leak is on your front wheels. You have rubber hoses that come off the steel line to the caliper, and with age those deteriorate and the rubber gets brittle and it starts cracking and those leak. And that you'll know immediately because your brakes will be almost on the floor, the car will still stop, but your front brakes won't work as effectively. You'll feel it immediately. You'll think to yourself there's no brakes in the vehicle. That's what brake hydraulics and clutch hydraulics are in your vehicle and how they operate. Of course, with today's modern cars, your brake master cylinder will work in conjunction with your ABS and traction control units. So your brake fluid will come out of here into the electronic unit, and that will then be controlled by the onboard computer as whether to release this wheel or slow that wheel, and that's how that works. But just an interesting fact, ABS brakes were first invented for use with airplanes to prevent airplanes skidding when they landed. And then the technology has developed further and now it's used in motor vehicles. So ABS unit will apply and release your brakes up to 15 times in a second, which will enable you to actually control your vehicle and not lock your wheels up. Because as soon as you lock your wheels up, your vehicle skids and it's out of control, and it actually doesn't slow down as quickly as you need it to. So that's why they've introduced the ABS systems to work with your brake. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the video that we've done for you. Thanks for watching, and please join us for our next video.